Welcome, everybody, to our last session of the day, Filling the Market Bag, Farmer Needs and Incentive Impact, as part of our 2021 Ohio Nutrition Incentive Network annual convening. Rachel Tayse of Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association will share data-driven descriptions of the needs farmers have for a thriving local food system and the ways incentive programming impacts local agriculture. Presentation time will be about 30 minutes with about 15 minutes at the end for questions. Please feel free to drop any questions in the chat as we go. Ohio Nutrition Incentive members will be monitoring the chat and answering there if possible. They'll also make note of any questions to be answered live during the Q&A. To begin each session today, we are sharing the newly revised Ohio Nutrition Incentive Network vision and mission. Our vision is all Ohioans have equitable access to healthy, locally grown foods within their communities and the resources to procure them. Diet-related health diseases and disparities are no longer a public health crisis. Ohio agriculture is an economically viable and ecologically regenerative industry. It's an integral component of the Ohio food system. Its products are widely available. Ohio farmers and food workers are valued, respected, and appropriately compensated for their contribution to the health and well-being of their communities. Our mission is to increase nutrition security while strengthening Ohio's local food system. We're also beginning each session with a land acknowledgement, which we have sourced from the Ohio State University Office of Diversity and Inclusion. A land acknowledgement recognizes and respects the relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their ancestral and contemporary territories. We acknowledge that the state of Ohio occupies the ancestral and contemporary territory of the Shawnee, Potawatomi, Delaware, Miami, Peoria, Seneca, Wyandot, Ojibwe, and Cherokee peoples. These lands were ceded in the 1795 Treaty of Greenville and the forced removal of tribes through the Indian Removal Act of 1830. We would also like to encourage folks to add their pronouns to their displayed Zoom name or share them in the chat box. You can make that update by clicking on the three dots on your profile picture and clicking rename. I will now turn it over to Rachel of OFA.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging in there at our last session of the day. I'm going to start screen sharing. All right, here we go. Right, there we go. Yeah, so thank you, Beth, for the introduction, and Produce Perks and the Ohio Nutrition Incentive Network for holding this convening today. I was asked to speak about farmer needs and the incentive impact. As a staff member of the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, our association cultivates a future in which sustainable and organic farmers thrive, local food nourishes our communities, and agricultural practices protect and enhance our environment. In addition to working for OFA, I'm a beginning farmer myself. Hear me share a little bit about that throughout these slides. So today, I just want to share my goals, which are to increase awareness of farmer needs in the local food system and interventions that follow, and how incentives benefit farmers in Ohio. So let's start with considering, what do we know about Ohio farms? This is a picture of my farm, and I'm pretty representative of a lot of Ohio produce growers. So every year, you may know, or every 5 years about, the United States Department of Agriculture conducts a census. They typically do this by sending paper forms or online forms to those who have registered for a farm number. And this is what they found in the most recent census, which was 2017. For Ohio, generally, farms are small in size and low in their value of sales. 56%, I realize this might be hard for you to read, but 56% of all farms reported less than $10,000 in gross sales, and 47% are operating on less than 50 acres. So what do they produce? Largely, Ohio farms produce what you might expect if you go driving through rural areas, which are grains, livestock, hay, other crops like that. Produce sales total 193,368,000, which is kind of a drop in the bucket. It's a fairly low percentage of our agricultural production overall. Now, I mentioned that the census sends out forms to members, to farmers with a farm number. And it's important to state that USDA has a bit of a history of discriminating against farmers of color in particular. And so it's likely that they are underrepresenting or not hearing from a lot of farmers who might grow produce, particularly in urban areas or other community garden projects. Those folks often contribute a lot of produce to their community and use incentives. So these stats are to be taken with a grain of salt. And of course, at this point, they're several years old. But beyond the farms, what do we know about Ohio farmers? So there I am in my high tunnel. I grow nursery crops in addition to produce. And work off farm like most Ohio farmers. So in 2019 and 2020, a team from the College of Food and Agriculture at Ohio State did the first ever Ohio Farm Poll, which they hope to repeat on a biennial basis. And what they found was that the majority of farms rely on off-farm income to survive, the majority of farm families, that is. So the little pie chart in the bottom left there shows that 71% of farm families report that most of their income is from off-farm sources. And it's the red wedge that shows 8% report that all income is from farming. In addition, folks who answered the farm poll, and this was again related to those USDA Farm Service numbers, but it was sent to a representative group across Ohio and had a high response rate. 40% of those farmers say they rely on household savings to meet farm business expenses. And that the overall conclusion is that farm survival is linked to both household and farm business well-being. 35% of farms in this poll reported that healthcare costs were a major source of stress. That's behind weather and farmland costs and equal to farm business concerns. In addition, farmers face mental health challenges. And at this point, I'm going to invite Jenna Reese from the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation to tell us a little bit about this amazing mental health poll that they conducted and what Ohio Farm Bureau is thinking about farmers and those in rural areas. So
yeah, thanks, Rachel.
There you are. Great.
Yep,
Hi,
I'm
Jenna.
here. Thanks for having me, and thanks for talking about this issue and bringing more awareness to it. But like Rachel said, American Farm Bureau conducted a poll in December of 2020, and it was regarding the impacts of COVID-19 on rural mental health. And some of the key findings that they took away from that study was just that the percentage of rural adults who say mental health is important to them and their family increased from April 2019, and that an overwhelming majority of farmers say it is important to reduce the stigma about mental health. It was like 87%. And a lot cited the main obstacles to seeking help or treatment remain cost, availability, accessibility, stigma, and embarrassment. And this is a trend that we've seen coming for a little while. It started as the opioid epidemic, and that's when Ohio Farm Bureau started to take a look at this issue, and that grew to, you know, the wettest 12-year period on record that happened between July 2018 and July 2019, which further increased the stress that farmers were facing, and then COVID-19 hit. So it's been a crazy 3 or 4 years, and the as you can see from the slide, the data show that this is impacting our farmers. And broadly, we know based on studies that have been conducted that this is not just the case in Ohio, it's across the country. It's also in Great Britain, Canada, Australia. These areas are seeing the same challenges, and we're trying to send the message to people outside of agriculture that are trying to, such as the mental health community, and trying to explain, what's causing all this. We know all the pressures that farmers face, but they don't understand anything that's not on paper. And what do I mean by that? So you look at a farm that's multi-generational, and we're not always accounting for, it's not the stress of letting yourself and your family down. It's, I'm letting down 5 generations of my family, and this, we could lose the farm or on my watch. And just that type of pressure constantly, along with their lack of work-life balance, because work is life. It's a lifestyle, as we know, in agriculture, and it affects everyone in our families. So we've been working on it from the state level at Ohio Farm Bureau in a couple ways. A lot of our legislative efforts have been on the broadband expansion front, trying to get connectivity to our members in rural Ohio who face challenges accessing high-speed internet, so that they can use amazing technologies such as telehealth and using online counseling services. We think that that will really also help with the stigma of it, since everyone knows everyone in our small towns and nobody wants to have everyone talking about that. So an online forum would allow for privacy and anonymity. So we've been working on that. We've also been trying to recognize those who have been working on this topic in agriculture. Many of you knew our former Vice President of Public Policy, Yvonne Lasisco, who passed away tragically, but we have created what's called the Y Prize in her honor because of the work that she's done in this space to shed light on farmer mental health and present awards to individuals or groups who have gone above and beyond to address this issue. And that we'll have an article on that in our Buckeye Farm News for our June edition, if you guys would like more information on that. But there's also a lot of resources that have come together around this issue. We have collaborations across agriculture and mental health and addiction services coming together. I know OFA is part of some of those groups with us, a couple of them being the Ohio State University Mental Health Awareness Team that came together through the USDA FRSAN grant, and Ohio Farm Bureau along with OFA are on that advisory committee, and this is providing training for mental health first aid across the state. And if anyone's interested in that, I'll drop the link in the chat. There's also American Farm Bureau's Rural Resilience online course that they have done through Michigan State University and in conjunction with the National Farmers Union. So that training's available. I can drop that in the chat as well. So a lot of stuff moving, a lot of stuff happening. It's really encouraging to see this has taken off as an important issue to not only farmers, but also those outside the agriculture community who recognize the problem and really are compelled to assist. So it's kind of all I have. I know that was a lot of information, and I'll drop some of those links in the chat, and I'll be available for questions whenever that's appropriate, Rachel.
Yeah, I thought we might save question time for the end, but thank you so much, Jenna, for doing that, and really appreciate the American Farm Bureau having this poll and actually being able to, I'll share the link later, but they did a similar poll pre-COVID, and you can see the rates of change as well. So it's not, the story here is that it's not just the low-income shoppers who are facing significant issues, particularly in the COVID pandemic, but it's farmers as well. And what we know at the Ohio Nutrition Incentive Network is that it's important, obviously both groups are looking for that economic support, but they need agency and flexibility in how that is delivered, and humanizing and equity so that all farmers and all low-income shoppers can take advantage of these programs. So let me tell you a little bit more about how Produce Perks has helped farmers specifically. These are some slides taken from Lauren Vargo, who also serves on ONIN, and some of you have heard from her earlier. So thank you, Lauren, for letting me snip these into my presentation. But this is coming from our 2020 evaluation of programs. And as she shared earlier, there were 107 participating locations. And it's that number on the bottom left that I want to focus on for farmers. $855,515 of incentives were redeemed. And what that means is that that money that nearly $1 million went right into farmers' pockets and supported produce farmers directly through sales at their market price. So exactly who received those? There were 1,044 unique vendors recorded in FM Tracks, which is the software that's used to track the transactions of incentives. Half of those folks sold fruits and vegetables. So the impact is at least 500 vendors received some of the dollars from incentives. And we can see that in 2020, covered many zip codes in the state. And this is the total program impact is what you're seeing here. The darker values are zip codes that received between $20,000 and $42,000 of program impact. And this kind of shows the comparison from 2019 to 2020. You can see that the zip codes shifted a little bit, the geography shifted, but what you might not be able to see unless you're squinting at your screen is that the dollar value is almost doubled. And so you heard earlier that the incentive dollar to the low-income farmer or the low-income shopper doubled or had the potential to even be higher than that in some situations. But that meant that it was redeemed at higher rates as well for our farmers. So if we connect the data from way back at the beginning about produce sales in Ohio, in 2020, the amount of incentives, like I said, was $855,000, and produce sales in the last annual or the last U.S. Ag Census, which was 2017, were $193 million. That means, you know, if we ignore the fact that they're different years, 0.5%, a little less than 0.5% were coming from direct to consumer incentives. And that seems like not much, but if we also remember that many of the farms are grossing less than $10,000 a year, having that extra dollars available could be huge, could be the difference between someone continuing to grow. And it also shows that there's a lot of room to continue. The produce farmers are growing food in Ohio that could be incentivized. And the more that we're able to get those incentives out there and redeemed, the more we're able to make that circular connection between folks who want and need healthy food and the Ohio farmers that grow them. So specifically, what can we all do in the various roles that we occupy in the food system to help both the low-income shoppers and farmers? Obviously, I have to put in a plug for continuing to incentivize healthy food purchasing. We've heard about some great innovative pilot projects that Produce Perks Midwest has facilitated, and the standby of incentivizing at farmers markets and retail outlets is still vitally important to farmers. The other piece of information about the who grow produce in Ohio, and they are following growing practices that mitigate climate change. They're doing things like intensive crop rotation, has to be done if you're growing tomatoes, for instance, so that you avoid blight and disease. They're being careful with their use of resources and fertilizers and things like that. So this could have another impact of supporting the practices that we know can help ensure clean soil and water for the future. Also, low-income shoppers and farmers need infrastructure that serves communities. They need farmers markets that are able to do the kinds of facilitation of market boxes and response that we've seen this year in the COVID pandemic. As Jenna shared, reducing mental health stigma, which we all can do in our personal lives and then in our collective roles to share the resources that are available, address rural broadband issues, and get folks online and talking so that the mental health issues can hopefully be alleviated. Of course, low-income shoppers and farmers are both often in need of affordable, accessible health insurance and childcare to stay healthy or be healthier. And then we have to ensure on a continual basis that our programming is just and equitable. That is something that Produce First Midwest is tackling from an organizational perspective, and the network is sharing resources and considerations of how we make sure that we're reaching all people, not necessarily just the ones who speak English, for instance, not only the farmers who are landed and have access to significant resources, but folks who are doing creative work in very small locations. So with that, I encourage you to do more reading in the Ohio Farm Poll, the Farm Bureau Rural Mental Health Poll, and Opportunity in the Time of Crisis, which is a report that OFA put out, along with Produce First Midwest, the Ohio Food Policy Network, and a lot of other folks who are on this call. My contact information is there, including my phone number and personal email if anybody wants to follow up about that. And I'm going to stop screen sharing so that we can hopefully have a discussion about ways that you've seen farmers express need and that they've been supported in the local community. So I welcome questions in the chat box or by unmuting yourself at this point.
Rachel, I have a question. I'm wondering if you or other folks on the call have any thoughts on removing some of the barriers to entry for SNAP for direct farmers. So I know that a lot of the farmers in my area, which is Summit County, and contiguous counties, aren't authorized to take SNAP, and because they're participating in markets. And that seems like in more rural areas where markets can be a greater distance or less easy to participate in, that seems like a challenge. Well, I know it's challenging for farmers to participate and offer these healthy food incentives in their communities. So, you know, I'm not sure what we can do to encourage FNS to help make that challenge less problematic, but, you know, just wondering if there are any creative thoughts out there about how in areas where markets are less accessible to farmers and customers, how to broaden the impact of nutrition incentives.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think there's two barriers at play, right? First, the getting farmers able to go through the FNS system to get a registered number. I know I've worked with a few folks who are from non-traditional backgrounds, and they've really struggled with the kind of bureaucracy of that. So I think, you know, we could encourage the Food and Nutrition Service to have an easier application program. And then it comes down to kind of the resources needed to accept and to join the network and do all of the record keeping and things like that. You know, I really appreciate, Jenna, you bringing up the rural broadband issue, because that's one that can affect folks. If you don't have access to internet systems that might allow you to upload the data that's required, that makes it a little bit more problematic to participate. So I know we have a couple of farmers in the audience here who have been able to navigate that system. It took time and it wasn't always easy. So I'm not sure I am off the cuff thinking of any really creative solutions to that. But that is an area that it would be great for ONIN to consider some pilots of, you know, how can we offer like direct at farm stands, or farmers who have farm stands, the ability to offer incentives. There's a question. Yeah, so Rachel was asking about kind of the same question on offering incentives through farm stands and CSA programs. Does this happen? How do you navigate some of the challenges? Yeah, so the Summit County program that kind of facilitated a farm box is a version of a CSA program that was supported. There is definitely a challenge in that CSAs, that EBT wants the card to be swiped at the time of service. So it kind of takes a little bit of creative thinking outside of using the traditional CSA model where a farmer is paid a lump sum up front. But I know in Columbus, there was a CSA program for a while that was offering incentives by just agreeing to swipe per delivery. And that worked pretty well for them for a while. Does anybody else want to jump in with any farm stand or CSA program options? Amy, are you unmuted for that?
No, not for that, for another question. So I'm staying
Okay.
silent in case there are other questions.
We do have a number of farm stands and CSAs that offer the program across the state. I would echo Rachel's thoughts on the challenges just logistically for CSAs in particular to offer the program. But there are a couple. One is City Fresh out of the Northeast region that could be worth looking up. They do a great job. I would say overall, and with both the farm stands and the CSA programs, probably I think our weakness is getting people to those sites. They're just not as popular as a farmer's market location. And so I'd love to hear, if there are other programs nationally that have some creative ways for getting the word out on and making it convenient for folks to utilize those resources. But yep.
Yeah, thanks for speaking up, Tia. You were one of the folks I was thinking about. I know Tia through OFA and know that their farm is able to accept EBT benefits, but she brings up the point that it's risky to commit to a CSA for an EBT customer, because if the EBT customer loses their ability to pay, they can drop out and they haven't prepaid for the CSA, which is what the farmer usually counts on. So I appreciate you sharing that. It would be great to think of some ways to mitigate that risk for farmers, because the CSA model surely is really effective at giving farmers funds when they need them and also allowing them to plan throughout the season. Amy?
So I have a question that's, if we're looking to individual farmers at farm stands, I'm going the other direction to say, what in this data and in our experiences with helping those who are growing specialty crops, vegetables, and fruits and selling them at markets might be helping to make the case for more Ohio growers to be thinking about growing specialty crops? I mean, is there compelling data to be shared, or a compelling story? Stories maybe sexier than data, that might be helping to make the transition for growers who are growing more traditional commodity crops to enter this game? And is that a pipe dream?
Well, I share it if it is, but as you might know. Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of excitement right now around regenerative agriculture and that concept, and that tends to be about pasture raising livestock as a way of using underutilized land or converting land from commodity crops to something of higher value, which is meat. So I think there would be a case to be made that that produce can provide similar benefits of higher values per acreage and also better improvements in soil health over just continuing a kind of a commodity system. The challenge is that vegetables are largely undervalued in the market, right? And so you could you could consider that an acre of garlic, for instance, has the potential to earn, it's very high, like $30,000 an acre, which is way more than people can get for corn. But you have to be able to sell that, and there isn't that much of a market for that garlic if you were selling it at kind of a farmer's market value. So you know, I think programs like Produce Perks can incentivize so that the price can be high enough that farmers can make a living and potentially expand. But again, I'd have to think a little bit more about how to do that convincing. Of course, it brings in the land access issue. A lot of smaller farmers, when they want to expand, find it very hard to find appropriate land to do so that isn't in the quantity of, you know, hundreds of acres, which is usually unaffordable. I am trying to keep up with the chat here. What about examples of using EBT for online purchase? Heard that there was a USDA pilot. Yes, my understanding is that there has been a pilot going on, but that there wasn't a lot of activity in Ohio. Can anybody else in the network jump in there?
Rachel, the rest of those comments are all from me. So the online SNAP pilot has largely been restricted to large scale retailers. I forget who they are. I think it's Walmart and Amazon in Ohio are currently the only ones. So I was on a call with FNS, which is the part of the USDA that authorizes SNAP use. I think it was last week, it could have been the week before, to do a listening session because they'll be releasing a request for applications, I think in June, for folks to sort of take the lead on the development of systems and processes for online SNAP for markets and direct with farmers. So it's in the pipeline, but I think it's going to be quite a bit before it's widely available. And there's a lot of technicalities involved, like, you know, what Rachel mentioned about the challenges with CSAs and that point of transaction versus point of grocery procural is one of them. And, you know, the incorporation of that platform and systems to facilitate nutrition incentives is also an additional complexity. So hopefully it moves faster than I've seen the USDA and FNS move on other things, but you know, at least we're making baby steps at this point.
I will say that when farmers markets had to respond to COVID, many of them went online, right, and incorporated online ordering. And farmers market managers, some of whom are on this call, went to some heroic efforts to figure out how EBT customers could still shop the market and receive their benefits and their incentives. So if that is a particular thing that you have a question about, we do have experience within the network to share about that. I think, you know, the systems took a while to smooth out, and they are in place now, but there was just a lot of kind of canoodling to get around all of these rules. So, you know, on a larger scale, you know, we could be talking about and encouraging the USDA at any opportunity of a listening session to remove some of those barriers and saying, like, let's not make it so hard. You know, there's lots to ask for from the USDA, I think, and lots to be thankful for, like this program. What else are folks thinking about in regards to how farmers use the program and how they benefit?
Well, I just had another thought. When I was managing markets, I always found it very fascinating that certain produce vendors within the market seem to receive a lot of the SNAP tokens and produce perks tokens. And I always wanted to explore what those characteristics about those businesses were that, you know, encourage that, because I think that finding out what some of those influential characteristics are might be an opportunity to build that for more farmers. And a side note related to that is I think that ONIN could probably be doing a little more of this work, and market managers could be doing a little more of this work. And I think that some farmers within markets could be doing a little bit more of this work. But I don't think that farmers within the markets context fully understand, you know, where that one token is different from another token. They just know they can accept all of the tokens, right? And so I think that putting those together, so for farmers to understand the opportunity more and help them take advantage of that opportunity more, can really only build impact of the programs. And to make that a question for anybody else who's with us today, just wondering if like you've seen similar things, or if you see opportunity, if you're a farmer and you see opportunity for your peers to engage differently with the program. I'd be curious to hear that.
Makes me think about a lot of farms have a social mission, and especially community gardens and places that serve the community directly. So what kind of lessons can be learned from those folks, and maybe are farms that already have kind of a social justice mission an area for ONIN and produce perks to target for offering, you know, on-farm SNAP benefits and incentives. Smaller, newer farms have a mission, seem to have a mission, Tia shares. Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. One issue, I was kind of scrolling through to see who's in the room, and my favorite person who likes to mention this isn't here. But you know, one thing we have discussed at ONIN before, and in other listening sessions with farmers I've heard, is that you know, produce is not the only healthy food, right? And so is it possible that a incentive program could address other foods like pasture-raised livestock that have a similar impact in terms of environmental impact and impact on farmers needing some price support? And largely we've had trouble with that, with finding funders to support that. But it's a potentially good idea for the future. We have the system in place to support incentives. And incentives are a great driver of human behavior. And they also allow that agency and flexibility that customers really need. So, you know, I, for one, would love to see incentives move into the healthy foods that we all eat outside of fruits and vegetables. Yeah, Tia's raising a point about the age of a farm, not necessarily the age of a farmer, but, you know, not to limit outreach to new and young farmers, but maybe some of the stalwarts at the farmers markets could use some outreach too.
Rachel, I can share a thought on, because I agree as well, and I know we've had conversation around this, but the expansion of incentives to support non-produce purchases and so forth. And I think there's opportunity at state levels to explore that type of support. Not that it's not within the opportunity at a USDA level to expand nutrition incentive programming to support non-produce purchases, but nonetheless, I wouldn't recommend holding one's breath on that either. And as for those that weren't in the TANF session that Beth spoke at and led, we have explored and found opportunities to support CSA type models and purchases utilizing state appropriated dollars that didn't require that SNAP match, which is kind of a sidestepping here to addressing some of the things that we're talking about. But again, at a state level, I think there is opportunity to explore how to expand incentives to support non-produce items, as well as connect to CSA type opportunities that don't require that trigger of that SNAP match, right?
Yeah, and that's what's exciting, I think, about Ohio having been in this game for a little while now and having the power of the statewide network and all of you folks who are here is that, you know, how can we kind of align a variety of different programs to really connect the dots between farmers and those in the food system who can't afford the local food. And more opportunities to advocate within NIFA.
Yeah, I see Rachel's comment there.
Yeah.
I'm on board for said advocacy, Rachel.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I'll say there's been some flexibility and movement, I think, in the produce prescription side of GusNIP around not having those dollars be used just for fresh fruits and veggies. There's some movement around canned and frozen fruits and veggies as well. So I think that, you know, given the right advocacy efforts, it could be a case that can be made.
Well, I know supporting Ohio growers and, you know, obviously the connection to farmers markets has been part of all of our programming since day one, but it hasn't necessarily elevated to the part of our story that we have been telling others and telling ourselves until recently. So Rachel and Jenna, I'm really grateful for your presentation and spending the time, the deeper dive today, talking about, you know, everything from small farm economics to mental health to broadband and rural communities, because I do think, you know, embracing that and understanding that part of our story is only going to strengthen our opportunities in the future.
Yeah, thanks for that, Amy. You know, I love to be the farmer in the room.
We're lucky to have you.
All right, well, without further questions, I think it's up to Beth to share a little closing.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Truly good information that you're sharing and important factors to keep in mind as we look at these incentive programs and how they impact local agriculture too. So this was our last session of the convening this time around, and thank you everybody for hanging in there with us. It's a lot of online time, we understand, but thank you so much for sharing that time with us. We will be following up next week with session recordings and some notes and contact information. And we hope that you've been inspired and intrigued by what you've heard today. And we look forward to connecting further, whether you're interested in modeling an approach off of something that you've heard or want to explore some new approaches that have not been discussed today. So thank you all very, very much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
And thanks to the Produce Perks team who had a hell of a week. Good job, everybody.
Big hats off to Aaron again. Wonderful job, Aaron. This has been awesome.
Aaron and Anna and Tevis and Kristen, get some rest.
Everybody.
Thanks again, all.
Thank you all so much for the time.